we're going to begin with some meditation as we've been doing. And so sit comfortably, relax your body, sit with your spine straight, and your eyes not completely closed nor completely open. Take a deep breath, and as I've been asking you, just as an exercise, just try to sense your heartbeat. Pay attention to your heartbeat. In doing so, there's nothing that you have to create. In fact, you have to pay very close attention to even sense that. Now simply shift your attention to your breathing in the same way. Probably immediately you'll notice that you're breathing consciously. Aim is just to watch the breathing without controlling it. Let go of attention to what you're seeing, hearing, smelling, what your body is feeling. See if you can let go of the distraction as some people are still coming in. Bring your attention inside. Use your mental consciousness, watching the breathing, and simply be aware of two things: when you're breathing in and when you're breathing out. That's the wisdom component here. At the beginning, you can imagine breathing out your tension and any irritating minds. Imagine breathing out the energy that sustains them as you exhale, and breathing in the inspiration of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas when you breathe in. Relaxing, breathing out the tension, breathing in the calm. And when you feel the tension gone, again, go back to just watching the breathing. Whatever thoughts come to your mind, just let them go. Have no plans right now. There's nothing that needs to be remembered. your breath exemplifying the very nature of impermanence. The breath comes in, remains but a moment, an instant, and then is exhaled. Now follow one breath up the nostrils as though it was going to the crown of your head. Of course, it's going straight to your lungs. Down to your throat, to your heart chakra, the middle of your chest, near your spine. Leave your attention there and let go of watching the breathing. Simply watch your mind. One part of the mind, like a spy, watching the contents of the mind. Perhaps there's some calm moments between the images and thoughts. Try to hold on to that. If not, simply watch the thoughts. Don't get involved in them. In the spaciousness of your mind, there may be some quite obvious objective thoughts, perhaps an all-pervasive feeling in the mind of happiness or unhappiness, kind of like the all-pervasive pollution or fragrance in the air, in the sky. Cloud-like thoughts coming and going. Don't focus on the contents of the mind, but on the substratum of the mind within which that content is rising. The clear light nature of your mind. Like a vast space, sometimes temporarily occupied by clouds, or birds, or smog or fog, but always remaining the same nature as those temporary objects disappear. Clear, unobstructing. See if you can focus on that as your object of concentration. Imagine withdrawing your attention inward to your heart area, heart chakra, like a turtle withdrawing its limbs, its head and forearms into the shell. Withdraw your attention away from your eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body consciousness. In a sense, into the cave of your heart chakra. Quiet, just mental consciousness, observing itself. Even the very presence of thoughts that might otherwise be distracting can be understood to point to the unobstructing nature of the mind. The fact that they're there indicates the mind is unobstructing and is conscious of them. So let go of your attention to the thoughts, the content. Pay attention instead to the clear light nature of the mind within which they're arising. Let go again and again. Let go of your doubts. Those are arising as thoughts within the mind. Refocus on the substratum of the mind within which they're arising. Let go of the subtle sense of the presence of the body that your mind is partially paying attention to. That perception also is arising to your mental consciousness. You don't have to focus on that. Instead, let that disappear and refocus on the spaciousness of the mind that you know lies behind that. This clear, quiet mind is our resource. It's always with us. This clear light nature of the mind can be called the conventional Buddha potential. Within this mind, we can develop all the good qualities that we lack. We can enhance those that we do have, and we can eliminate the faults that we have from this mind. Recall what we have right now. Everything that we need, all the resources that we need to achieve enlightenment, or in a lesser sense, nirvana, or in a more practical sense for us beginners, we have all the resources we need to make the Dharma realizations that can propel us into future lives as humans, to develop bodhicitta, patience, wisdom. We have a life of leisure and endowment that's so rare to find. we've encountered lives like this over beginningless time occasionally, but up until now, over the numberless lives that we've spent in cyclic existence, we've never taken advantage of these lives of leisure and endowment when the Buddha's teachings existed on earth or wherever we lived. When there were practitioners, benefactors, due to the laziness of being attached to comfort, amusements, we've frittered away our lives. Right now, recognizing the great value that can be achieved with this life, and cognizant also of its fleeting nature. That death is definite. This life that I have right now will definitely end, because death comes to everyone. There's no way to escape it. Even with the best medical attention, with resources at my disposal, when my karma finishes, I'll die. All of the great beings of the past have died. The Buddha took the aspect of dying. All of the people that we might have admired, our relatives, our ancestors, some of our close colleagues even, have died. The young children that we know now will grow up, become adolescents, adults, they'll grow old, they'll eventually die. In the same way, I will die. Death is definite because death comes to everyone when their karma finishes. I'm no exception. I'll definitely die. I'll definitely die because the life that I have yet to live is constantly decreasing. With every second, I'm getting closer to death. And when that time comes, there's no extra life. There's no timeouts that can be called, no last cigarette, last request for some moments to meditate. Every instant as though I'm falling through time, like in an elevator falling. We know it's inevitably got to reach the bottom. Falling through time. With a definite end. Every second getting closer to the end of this opportunity for leisure and endowment. The chance to create the causes, the material causes that can give the results in future lives that we seek to continue practicing the Dharma. Most of our life, from childhood until, from birth until early childhood, middle childhood, we had no idea of the Dharma. And even as we began to investigate the Dharma, it was unclear for a long time. A third of our life is spent in sleep. How many hours in the pursuit of food, preparation of food, savoring food. Work, amusements, so little time that we actually can devote to the Dharma. As death is definite and our life is spent this way, I have to practice the Dharma. The Dharma is that which will actually uphold me from suffering, not the worldly dharmas. Not pleasure of the senses, resources, fame or praise or love. These will only, at the most, if I can encounter them, which is rare enough due to our karma, but they can only bring some temporary relief right now. They can't, seeking those worldly dharmas as a source of refuge, cannot bring us what we seek for, long-term protection from suffering. Only the holy Dharma, the realizations in our mind, understanding impermanence, understanding the benefits of patience, the experience we get from developing kindness and love and forgiveness, those insights, that's what can really protect us from suffering. Because they create the karmic causes for ourselves to practice in the future, to have human lives in the future, and to have the imprints in our mind to continue those realizations. It's not enough to have the hope, the wish to practice later, knowing that death is definite, because we may die at any time. The time of death is uncertain. We're human beings in the southern continent where the lifespans are not fixed. Besides that, we're in a degenerate age when there are many causes, untoward causes that can cause our death. Earthquakes, hurricanes, droughts, sickness, auto accidents, muggings, jealous friends, the time of death is uncertain because there are more causes of death than there are causes of life. Causes of life are very few. Our karma, the cooperative conditions of air, water, food, some protection from the elements. The things that we think of as causes of life often, or conditions of life, a car, different kinds of airplanes and so forth, actually become the causes of our death, means of transportation. Even the food we eat can become causes of death. Besides that, our body is very fragile. A simple bite of a little tick carrying a bacteria or other pathogen, we can die. Scratched by a thorn. If we drop an iron or steel safe down the stairs, may be undamaged at the end. But if we fall down the steps, we could lose this life. Certainly break our bones. There's no certainty what will come first. Tomorrow or the next life. Death is definite. The time of death is uncertain. It might be this week, might be this year. Therefore, I can't put off the practice of Dharma. I have to practice now. I have to start to integrate Dharma into my life, in those activities that I used to see as different than the Dharma. Because at the time of death, nothing is going to help me except the Dharma. My body that I've cared for so much this lifetime, sought pleasures for it, it was perhaps a source of attraction to others when I was youthful and attractive. It can't help me at the time of death. I can't take it with me. It can't protect me from the impending death. My possessions cannot be taken with me. The things that I've relied on as sources of influence and pleasure. My friends and family, instead of helping me at the time of death, as I might think romantically, they can actually engender attachment in me, fear of losing them, anguish at their squabbling about my legacy, what I'm leaving behind, what inheritance I'm leaving them. The long-term yogis and yoginis, Dharma practitioners, prefer to die in solitude and quiet, meditating, because the only thing that helps at the time of death is the Dharma. Therefore, I have to practice Dharma, because death is definite. I have to practice the Dharma now, from now, integrated into my life, because the time of death is uncertain. And I have to, as much as possible, to practice pure Dharma, only the Dharma, because only the Dharma helps at the time of death. Which is inevitable. That's all I can take with me, the karmic instincts in my mind. Imagine the time of death. Maybe soon, who knows, maybe this week, this year, in the next 5 years. certainly even the youngest person in the room, within 50 or 80 years, they'll be dead. Perhaps lying on our bed at home or in the hospital, approaching death. When the close signs of death occur, as the final dissolution of the elements that sustain our consciousness begin to absorb, first the I consciousness degenerates as the energy current upon which it is supported begins to absorb to the heart chakra. The earth element that gives the solidity to the body begins to absorb. The form aggregate of the 5 aggregates. To the outer observers, our body looks emaciated, wizened. The glow of our complexion is gone. And to our own mind, if we're not distracted by many thoughts, we'll notice a wavering vision appearing in the mind due to the dissolution of the earth element and the ascendancy of the water element. Like a mirage, the mirage-like vision. Are we prepared for that? Would we be able to utilize this mind right now? A meditator can recognize that, not be distracted by other thoughts, and use that moment to remind themselves to meditate on emptiness and selflessness, or on the clear light nature of the mind. After the earth element absorbs, the water element begins to absorb the fluidity of our body. Our mouth dries up, the moisture in our nostrils also. The ear organ is no longer a valid support for hearing as our ear consciousness absorbs. We no longer can hear well those around us. The feeling aggregate absorbs, so gross feelings are becoming less prominent. There's a inner vision in our mind, if our mind is not distracted, of floating smoke or cloud in our mind, smoke-like vision. This is an indication that we're closer to the final death. At this time, if we can observe that, we can recall that we're approaching death and try to meditate on emptiness or the clear light nature of the mind. Leave an imprint in our mind with a subtler and subtler consciousness. Then the fire element absorbs. The heat of our body begins to diminish. Our digestion stops. Our breathing slows down. The nose consciousness ceases to function. Those around us notice the breathing becoming shallower. Inhalations shorter, exhalations longer. And we notice in our own mind, if our mind is not distracted, the vision of fireflies or sparks indicating the absorption of the fire element and the final ascendancy of the air element. If we're not distracted, if we notice this, we can remember to meditate on selflessness, emptiness, or the clear light nature of the mind. Could we do that now? Are we ready for this final activity of this lifetime? Finally, the air element absorbs. The breathing stops completely. The tongue consciousness and body consciousness finally no longer function. The tongue thickens, becomes blue. There's no sense of any response when our body is touched. Body consciousness absorbs. But to our inner experience, there's still consciousness, the last vestige of our gross mental consciousness of this lifetime. A vision within it of a flickering butter lamp at its last throes. Sort of a bluish glow. If we're a Dharma practitioner who's familiar with this, we can actually utilize this to meditate on emptiness, selflessness, or the clear light nature of your mind. Leaving an imprint with that subtle mind. Finally, all of the intellectual faculties of this life absorb. No more sense of purpose, direction, no intellectual activity. The 80 indicative conceptions absorb. Very, very subtle mind begins to absorb, begins to appear, the mind of white appearance. So white element from our crown chakra begins to descend to the heart chakra. Like a sky filled with white light. The appearance of the sky when the moon is full, but not looking at the moon, just the vibration of white in the sky. Like that appears to our mind. If we're trained, we can recognize this and immediately use that opportunity to meditate on emptiness, selflessness, the clear light nature within which this white appearance is arising. Focus on that instead of the white appearance. Remembering that we're getting closer to death. We've already been pronounced dead by the attending doctors. Our breathing stopped some time ago, but our mind has not left the body yet. We're not yet dead. We can no longer hear or see what's around us, or feel. Now the red element at the navel chakra begins to ascend, come up to the heart chakra, and the vision changes in the mind from a white appearance to a more vivid clarity of the mind with a subtle copper red colored tinge, increasing clarity called a red increase. This we will definitely experience. Will we have the ability at that time to recall the clarity of mind, the emptiness, within which this red appearance is arising? Or will it go unused? Finally, these white and red elements meet at the heart chakra and cover the subtlemost mind and wind there. And we begin to experience an increasing darkness within this spaciousness of the mind. It's called the black near attainment. Nearly attaining the final subtlemost mind of this life. Not yet there, but nearing it. The spaciousness of the mind is pervaded by a darkness, like on a moonless night, no moon, as the darkness begins to become more and more thick. Finally, all of these, even these subtler minds in this lifetime, the white, red, and black visions, they all absorb, and as though we fall into a swoon or a faint. And then dawning, the final clear light of death, like the clarity we've been trying to imagine, like a vast space without any clouds, without any obstruction, like sitting on a mountain, a hill, after the summer rains have removed all the dust and pollution from the air. Right before the sun rises, the sky is pervaded with a clear light, as though you could see forever. To recognize this as the potential of the mind, to recognize this as the appearance of emptiness, of true existence, would be the yogi or yogini's supreme achievement of this lifetime, leaving an incredible deep imprint in the subtlemost recesses of our mind. For ordinary beings, this might go by completely unnoticed. This we will definitely experience, this dissolution. And then, as the final act of this life, the mind, the subtlemost mind departs from this body. There is the reverse order of these visions. Black near attainment, a vision of red clarity, white appearance, and we enter into the intermediate state, the bardo, before our next rebirth. This will definitely happen to me. Maybe soon. The rebirth that I take depends on my state of mind as I'm approaching death, on the virtuous karma that I've created this lifetime, on the diminishing of the negative imprints that I have now. I think as death is definite, its time is uncertain, and only Dharma helps at the time of death. I'm going to participate in the class this morning as an exercise in ultimate healing, preparation for the journey to enlightenment. Not for myself alone, but for all living beings who are exactly the same as I, caught up in the ego, caught up in trivial pursuits, attachments, addictions, hostility, caught up in the vision of this lifetime. For their benefit, I'm going to listen to the teachings, think about them, contemplate them. When something becomes clear, some understanding becomes clear, I'm going to meditate on it. I'm going to participate this morning in order to quickly achieve enlightenment, however long it takes, however many lives, for the sake of all living beings. And then bring your attention back to the present. Twist and turn if you need. How was your meditation experience? Any observations? Questions? Is that a question? No, it's an ear scratch. So, we can put on the light again. Up here. That's good. This one? Yeah, I think that one. There we go. Thank you. So I think I recognize most of you, so you're in the right room. I always have to wonder whether someone's walked in by mistake and was expecting something else and sat through this long meditation out of, just embarrassment to leave or something. What was that about? Can you imagine? Okay, so this is the unit on death and dying in Discovering Buddhism. And one of the major things that we've talked about as we did in this meditation was the meditation, the classic meditation in this Tibetan tradition on death, called the 9-round meditation on death. Not all of the Tibetan traditions emphasize this, but I think in the Gelugpa tradition especially, it condenses, it's not an invention of the Tibetans, it's come from the great Indian pundits and meditators, to try to bring about an understanding of the gross aspect of impermanence, the most important gross aspect of impermanence, meaning our own demise. When we talk about impermanence, we talk about gross impermanence and subtle impermanence, remember? Gross impermanence is when, say for instance, the coffee cup is fallen to the ground and is destroyed. It's no longer a cup. Subtle impermanence of the cup is the fact that every moment, even though it appears to be the same, it's changing. Right now, every moment, we're changing. Even our mind is changing. But we don't recognize that. If we could recognize our subtle impermanence and the subtle impermanence of our mind, our emotions, our relationships with others, we would be much more free. We would recognize that we could become friends with enemies. We could recognize that there was no need for attachment, because those people that we were very attached to would inevitably be changing moment by moment. Like my uncle uses this analogy, like two marbles beginning to run parallel with each other along the floor, but when they reach some little, dust or pebble or some imperfection in the floor, one might veer off to the side. if we understood subtle impermanence, we wouldn't be so distraught when our companions change. But subtle impermanence is a great realization, difficult to achieve. We can understand it intellectually, but to really have that perception is difficult. But what we can perceive now is something, the end product of that gross impermanence, say on ourself. Very difficult to imagine that you could have a realization of subtle impermanence before you realized gross impermanence. The fact that we're going to die. So this is why, at this point, one of the reasons that we're studying about death is to bring up, to have a realization which is so powerful to overcome our delusions. In the face of death, the fact that we're definitely going to die, and we're changing every moment, life takes on a much different appearance to us. It doesn't have to be a nihilistic appearance. It always has to be tempered with an understanding of the value of what we have right now. Say the preceding meditation on the value of perfect human rebirth. We can call the life of leisure and endowment. Leisure sounds kind of like leisure class, of the Bahamas, but leisure in the sense of we're free from, we have the leisure or the freedom from the suffering of the lower realms, the ignorance of the animal realm. We don't have to be used by others, even though we may feel compelled by our karma. We have the freedom to practice the Dharma right now. So within that perspective, recognizing the inevitability of death is like like an atom bomb, my teacher Lama Yeshe used to say, to overcome our delusions. Right now, the ultimate antidote to our delusions is called the realization of emptiness. It maybe have been alluded to in some of the previous units. Some of you who are older students may have studied and know well about emptiness, what that means. Selflessness of the person, emptiness of true existence. That realization is an ultimate antidote to all our delusions. But until we have that realization, something that we can grapple, something that we can utilize now, is this realization of death and impermanence. Death, gross impermanence. When I say the word death and impermanence, maybe impermanence you can understand as subtle impermanence. This kind of understanding can act as our wisdom right now to overcome our delusions. An ultimate antidote. So this is kind of the perspective of why this is an important topic. An energizing agent for us to use this life in the most useful, meaningful way. Not to get distracted into the meaningless activities of this lifetime. So we've talked about the 9-round meditation on death. Remember the 3 roots, we could say the 3 root reasons, the 3 root facts. Death is definite, time of death is uncertain or indefinite. Nothing helps at the time of death except the Dharma. Do you have any questions about these topics as we're talking about them? Any doubts or qualms or observations? Can you be, yeah.
I have a question that I've always wondered. What is like the threshold, or what constitutes like a realization of, especially of these like Lam Rem topics or something like that? Like under the realization of emptiness, like I understand, like, I mean, it's kind of more clear what that experience is. But what about like you were talking about the realization of subtle impermanence? Like what constitutes an actual realization as opposed to just like the practice on it, or?
sort of there will be different kinds of behavioral changes that you would notice if you actually had these realizations. Say for instance, simply realizing the value of this perfect human rebirth would be a person who realized perfect human rebirth would be, from our point of view, a spiritual person, because they wouldn't have the mind that would be so concerned about engaging in the activities of this lifetime. They know the value, if they had a realization of the perfect human rebirth, it would be one of being very totally joyful. Like the classic example is like a beggar without any possessions in the trash, looking for some morsel of food, finding a jewel, an incredibly valuable jewel, something that would fulfill all their wishes. Excuse me. Better cough away from the microphone. Sometimes when the lamas are leading pujas and they pin a little mic on their thing and then they cough, and they put their chin down closer to the microphone, and the whole auditorium revibrates with their cough or their sneeze. Excuse me. Yeah, so say even a realization of the perfect human rebirth would be one of having incredible joy, a lack of depression, always seeing the potential, not being depressed. Realizing impermanence would be one of seeing the potential all the time of change, how things are not, definitely one way. Also emptiness, seeing the potential of growth and change and so forth. I mentioned before, and I'm not sure if many of you were here in that particular talk once in Kopan, when there were some statues of Tara being made, a set of 21 statues of Tara. And there was a main model made out of wax. You know how they make the statues in Nepal in the east, of the lost wax process? Remember we talked about that? You take you make this image in wax and you put it into, say, plaster or some substance like that, and until the plaster completely hardens, and then you heat that in an oven and all the wax can be melted out. You're left with just a negative of the original image that you then can fill with metal. So this wax image had been left outside at Kopan under a tree there. We call the Bodhi tree. It actually is a Bodhi tree. And by the person who had made it, by mistake, when they were getting into the taxi, they'd left it in a box when they were packing the taxi, and they forgot it. And some days later, I found it during a coffee break, and I opened it, and I noticed that some of the ornaments had fallen off, the ear had fallen off, nose, and because they'd all been put on with wax. In the heat of the days, as it melted off, I brought them up to Lama Zopa and Lama Yeshe, who were on the roof of the Kopan Gompa, having breakfast. And Lama Zopa took the aspect, I think as a learning exercise for me, took the aspect of being, like this, oh no, like upset, this, what karma, this is, the Tara's, Lama Yeshe, behind him, the epitome of wisdom, realization, said, doesn't matter, Zopa. Not so much to Lama Zopa. I think this is kind of like a tag team. Sometimes we hear things, maybe a lama criticizing or chastising or advising another lama, it's almost like a comedy team. Someone setting up the joke. What is it called? Something like it. Was it?
The straight man.
The straight man. Lama Zopa has often played the straight man with Lama Yeshe. So this was kind of an illustration of our response Lama Zopa exemplifying our response of, when something changes, when something untoward happens that we didn't expect, that was not a happy experience, and Lama Yeshe showing the response with wisdom, the wisdom of impermanence, the wisdom of emptiness. Doesn't matter. Say, doesn't matter because we still have a perfect human rebirth. Things happen to us. We lose our fortune, we lose our health, we lose our beauty, we lose our friends, our baby leaves us. Have I mentioned that? That's kind of the, in my opinion, the root essence of all blues music. That's, you know the song I'm thinking of? I think maybe Elvis sang it. My baby done left me. The blues, all of our depression, something that we lost. Our health, our wealth, our baby, our tractor in the blues music, our job at the diner or whatever. When that happens, ordinary people, ourselves being ordinary people, often fall into depression. We lose our perspective and so forth. But with the Dharma realization, realizing I still have a perfect human rebirth. Doesn't matter. Also realizing impermanence. This was inevitable from the beginning. That I would separate from that which was comfortable, attractive. It's the nature of impermanence. Realizing emptiness, that there was never anything really there. All of these levels of realization calm the mind in adversity, and they have different powers of doing so, different levels of elimination of the problem. So generally, any of the realizations will have a beneficial effect on us, better allowing us to better cope with what's happening, the different sufferings of cyclic existence. But they all have particular kinds of characteristics.
Do they need kind of what I was getting at is because when they talk about the realization of emptiness, it's kind of this deep meditative mystical type experience. More or less, I don't know, maybe that's
meditative, mystical type of experience. Okay.
Maybe that's a wrong depiction.
Well, you could say the same thing about realization of perfect human rebirth. Although that seems something that's very accessible to us, doesn't sound mystical. That itself could be quite deep experience. Realizing that. Usually when we talk about emptiness, we think about it something that has to be experienced in deep meditation. So, although we might think that the understanding of perfect human rebirth might be something that could be experienced in a less deep state. But it's also mystical in a sense. Have you heard of meditation called Tonglen? Giving and taking? Some of you have. When people talk about mystic, powers or psychic powers or something, we think of flying or clairvoyance or walking through walls or knowing past lives or knowing other people's minds or something. But the real mystic, kind of religious experience is being able to give up your own happiness for the happiness of others. To be able to give up your own temporary happiness for your own, say, eventual liberation, ultimate happiness. That's also a very great step. That's what we call renunciation, right? That's one step on the progression to leading to enlightenment, to have that kind of deferral of gratification. Not just deferring, like in this lifetime, we consider it maturity to defer the gratification right now when you want to be playing. Deferring that gratification till later in this lifetime by working now, getting an education, and then being able to relax later, having amassed some wealth, living many years in comfort and so forth. We consider that more mature, right? We consider it even more mature when a person can defer their own gratification for the gratification of others. Yesterday, I understand there was a memorial service or burial for, remind me of his name, Jeff?
Chef Loman.
Chef Loman. Did any of you know him? Did you, Alessandro? Shep apparently worked for, the State Department, or in various things over the years, and there were not only some Buddhists at his funeral yesterday, but John Negroponte, which some others, people from the State Department, many eulogies talking about how he and his wife were influential in saving maybe, millions of people's lives through humanitarian and aid and so forth throughout the decades. So that kind of realization we consider to be more mature, something worthy of respect, when a person can not only defer their own gratification now for their own happiness later, but to defer their own gratification for the benefit of others. So these are different signs of realization. That kind of thing is what's the real mystic kind of real, the real mystic, amazing kind of thing. Much more so than having clairvoyance or whatever.
Would you call that the all-accomplishing? Fortunately, the all-accomplishing, when you can achieve so much with very little effort, it all flows.
Yeah, you're thinking of that term is one we were going to be talking about at some point in terms of a certain kind of wisdom. Mm-hmm. Were you thinking of that?
Yeah, the very great humanitarian doing, just being able to envision and accomplish so much in a lifetime.
Right.
And with minimum effort.
Right. Spontaneous, effortless, that's kind of one of the qualities of enlightened mind. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the qualities that we might try to develop, that particular kind of ability. It's one of the things that Tara epitomizes also. Mm-hmm. Enlightened activity, effortless activity, all-accomplishing wisdom. So, I wanted to mention another aspect of this meditations, of these meditations on death and dying, and that is something called the 5 forces. Have you run across that in your reading, or at other points? Oftentimes we may hear about some, again, mystic practices of transference of consciousness that you may have heard about. POA. Have you heard of POA? There's some kind of practice where you can forcibly, with control, eject your consciousness near the time of death with an aim of, if you have the control or not is dubious, but with the aim of leaving this life and with a particular destination in mind, say the Pure Land, or at least to leave with the intention of taking rebirth as a human and so forth. But that kind of practice is indeed very, very, although the mechanics of it are something that we might be able to accomplish, whether we have the karma to fulfill our wishes of POA, where we want to take rebirth, this transference of consciousness, is another matter. What's considered more realistic at our stage is utilizing what are called the 5 forces at the time of death. In fact, it's alluded to in our Lama Chopa Puja. One of the last verses, it says, at the time of death, may I be able to, either by the transference of consciousness or utilizing the five forces of at the time of death, may I be able to, have a better rebirth. So let's take a little break, and after that is just a 11:45. Let's take a 5-minute break, and then we're going to talk about a little bit about this before we. So, in the there's a set of teachings in the Mahayana called the training of the mind. Maybe you've heard it translated in different ways. In Tibetan we say lojong. How does Robert translate that? Do you know? Yeah, lojong. Mind training, training of the mind. Lo means awareness or mind. Zhong means to train. So this is something which is kind of a complement or accompaniment or enhancement of the teachings on the Mahayana, how to develop bodhicitta. Okay. The training of the mind, lojong. And in there, in the lojong, one of the topics is talked about are the five forces. I think they also have, source in the sutras, also, these five forces. What it means is 5 particular states of mind that we kind of give you the basis of how to set the whole life's practice. I'm going to read a little bit from this translation. This is not the FPMT translation. This is from Geshe Tarchin's Center. This is the 2nd volume in Liberation in Our Hand, or in the palm of your hand. A Lam Rim text. You can find it in other Lam Rim texts also. And I may change the translation of some of the terms here, though. So a summary of what to do is one's lifelong practice. This is, if you think of your practice, of the rest of this lifetime, that can be summarized in these 5 things. And the order can change. In fact, I will change the order. Let's say the first one is the strength of motivation or intention. That's one of the strength or power. The strength of white seed, virtuous seed. The strength of repudiation, repudiation. The strength of familiarity, counting with me, and the strength of prayer. I'll read a little bit here, and then I'll go back to it. Among these 5, the strength of motivation or intention is particularly crucial. As soon as we get up in the morning, we should make a firm resolution by developing the following attitude. Thinking like this in the morning. In general, I must not allow this life to go by without accomplishing anything of real value, without something meaningful. In particular, more specifically, I must not allow this year to go by without accomplishing anything of value. If my whole life is wasted at the time of death, what would it be like, especially this year? And I must especially not allow today to go by without accomplishing anything of value. Therefore, I will bring meaning to my life by defeating my enemy, the self-cherishing mind, today. I think that's very tasty. Let's go again what these 5 are. They really tell us about how we do any kind of spiritual practice. At the beginning, motivation or intention is the most important thing. Our motivation for doing anything determines the karmic value of what we do. It doesn't depend on your action, whether you're making offerings at the altar, or making prostrations, or making great, building structures for the Dharma or something. If your motivation is not pure, that karma, the karma that you've created won't be pure karma, pure beneficial karma. The motivation at the beginning of an action is more determinative of the result, the karmic result, than anything else. It's why we enter into an action. It's like that which thrusts us in, that gives us the momentum. Even during that action, like say you're motivated with a very virtuous intention at the beginning, and during the activity, performance of the activity, whatever it is, whether it's charity or offering or whatever, during that, even if your mind wavers and forgets the motivation and so forth, just by the force of the motivation at the beginning, the whole action becomes virtuous. Of course, it's important during the activity to have let's say the proper, well-executed activity, whether it's charity or acting patient or whatever. But the most important thing in karma is the motivation. So of these 5 forces, the first one is called the force of motivation or intention, why we're doing something. So this can be applied every day in our life. And then even when you do retreat, to make this kind of motivation the rest of my life, what I'm going to be doing with the rest of my life. Trying to motivate, set an intention. I think when one takes ordination, the lamas say, when you first take ordination, you have pure vows. Say you've become a monk or nun, or if you first take bodhisattva vows or tantric vows, at that moment, before an instant has passed, you have pure vows. Maybe the next instant, when the ordinary mind arises, your vows are not quite as pure as they were before. So as soon as you take vows, they say, try to make a very strong motivation. Strong prayers and motivations, because at that point, the basis that you have is very powerful. I think similar kind of thing when you enter into the life, great beings who take rebirth consciously into human life, they motivate at the very beginning, what they're going to use this life for. And this sort of permeates the whole rest of the life. Even they become naughty when they're children, or they do other untoward things. The whole life has that flavor permeated by that initial motivation. So when you do retreat to try to motivate the rest of my life, from this moment, this is the beginning now. This is the beginning of the rest of my life. From now on, I'm going to try to make this life meaningful. This is a very meaningful expression, to make meaningful. Meaningless activities are those things that are not going to have lasting impact on us or negative impact on us. Becoming expert in the movie stars, or the different kinds of trivia that one can know, and so forth. To be meaningful means to use this life for these greater meanings of the perfect human rebirth. To create the causes of realization, of renunciation, of bodhicitta, of wisdom of emptiness, or even the subsidiary meditations. To get closer to realizing the value of this human rebirth, to understand death and impermanence. All of these things would be meaningful. Be meaningful to be working for nirvana or to achieve enlightenment. Do tantric meditations for the welfare of others. So the first thing in any puja, with any activity we do, the most important thing is motivation, intention. Like when we did our meditation at the beginning of the class, although there are prayers that are often done at the beginning of classes, lectures and so forth, that try to set the motivation, and they can, if you understand the meaning of those words and think about them, and have had some experience of that, sometimes it's better just to yourself, even if those prayers are being said, try to set your own motivation. By meditating, as we have. I've got a perfect human rebirth. It's so valuable. it's definitely going to be lost. There's all this great value that can be accomplished. Therefore, I'm going to listen to the teachings with the intention of making these realizations for the welfare of others. Something like that. When we used to do Chinrezi retreat with Lama Zopa Rinpoche in Laudo, the monastery where Lama Zopa meditated in his previous life. Were you ever there, Alessandra?
No,
Oh, you-
but he told me about it.
Oh, you were smiling. I thought you might have actually.
Yeah,
So-
he told me
We would have sessions with Rinpoche in the Gompa, and there would be many people from Laudo, local people and monks and nuns from that region, and then Western monks and nuns and lay people. There were maybe 150 people in the Gompa. And as soon as the session started, there was some prayers at the beginning. Everyone would start reciting Om Mani Padme Hum. And they're counting, keeping track, because they try to say as many Om Mani Padme Hums during this week or 2 weeks. There was one monk once who recited 100,000 Om Mani Padme Hums in one day. Franchino. You remember Franchino? Jeff does, maybe. When I tell him. Anyway, so everyone's reciting very quickly. Lama Zopa Rinpoche, the front. Most of the session, like I say it's a 2-hour session, say an hour and 20 minutes, hour and a half, meditating, setting the motivation, his motivation. And then, maybe 20 minutes recitation of mantra, or even less. And other people might think, well, waste of time, he didn't recite that many mantras. But his mantras were incredibly, powerful karmically. The virtuous action because of the motivation. Also, with concentration, that proper motivation, understanding of emptiness, our activities become very powerful. So motivation is very, very important. Second one, power of the white seed. What that means is to try to, whatever we do in lifetime, to always be accumulating virtuous karma, white karma. I think sometimes people, it's considered to be politically incorrect to say white is good and black is bad, right? Like Fidel is black complexion, but it's, there may be some people that might be offended if you use the word white karma. That's supposed to be virtuous karma, but there's, you understand what that means. The force of the white seed means to make a very forceful use of this lifetime to create virtuous karma. Because virtuous karma is kind of like the material cause of our future realizations and our future resources, the situation that we will find ourselves in. It's said that if you understand emptiness, deepest realization, you are even more careful about karma than you would be, just having studied about karma and being convinced about that. Because you recognize that all of that, everything that we experience, although it appears to be existent from its own side, to have a natural existence, inherent existence, it's all arising dependently on causes and conditions and other things, on the mind that perceives it, on the mind that imputes the concept or name and so forth, upon the basis of designation. All of these things are called dependent arisings. What arises to us, even though they're devoid of inherent existence, some kind of findable existence that we imagine, still they arise dependent on karma. So when you have an understanding of karma, it's not as though, if you have an understanding of emptiness, it's not as though you can violate the laws of karma. Sometimes people say that. I remember I studied yoga once in Beirut many, many years ago, and the Indian teacher had, he was supposedly supposed to be our saintly advisor. It was just hatha yoga, but he had very beautiful clothes and jewelry and so forth. And someone was teasing him about it, and he said, "Oh no, I'm beyond karma." And from a Buddhist perspective, someone who really was, you know, we're going to say beyond, even Buddha's not beyond karma. Let's say. When you've realized emptiness, it's not as though you can do any kind of negative thing. What this is alluding to is that when you have very high realization of emptiness, you're not the activities that you perform are not motivated by delusions. So to someone else, they may look like they're negative, but they may be actually beneficial for you and for other sentient beings. So the force of white seed means to utilize this lifetime to create as much virtuous karma as you can. The force of repudiation means to eliminate as much as you can the negative aspects of your mind through confession, through applying the antidotes. There's two aspects of this. One is the karma that we've already accumulated, maybe a heavy burden on our mind stream. Those karmic seeds on our mind can be eliminated or diminished in their intensity. Do you know how to do that? Do you know? You don't? Who knows? Do you know? How can you do that?
Purification practices?
Different kind of, what particular purification practices? River Ganges or?
No, like doing Buddhist purification practices.
Buddhist purification practices,
Like
not the River Ganges.
Vajrasattva recitation.
Or Punapala.
Oh, there's someone. Who said that? Was that Pam back there? Okay. That's the one. You should be.
Okay.
Right to the point. So, let's say I was not born Catholic. I wasn't growing, but just give an example. In Catholicism, I understand that you can go to the priest, at least you used to be able to, and confess your sins, right? And be absolved of them in some way because by the power of the priest's interceding with God or Jesus or something, you could be forgiven. From a Buddhist perspective, purification or confession doesn't amount to, asking Buddha's forgiveness or your guru's forgiveness. The main power of purifying negative karma comes about from recognizing the destructive action that you've engaged in, recognizing that, and feeling some regret, remorse, right? That's different than guilt. Are we okay? Oh, it's people just using that. You know what guilt is? What's the difference between guilt and remorse? Any idea? Do you have an idea? Are they same?
No, I feel like it's beating yourself up like in a picture way, Otherwise, just you're contemplating and say like, oh, this is in a way of observing passion and remorse, or rather regret is like contemplating that, guys, it went wrong,
Mm-hmm. We could, they're in a sense, they should be different, but we could conflate the two. We could imagine that if you've done something wrong, you could feel guilty about it, and we could say, yeah, I feel remorse about that, I feel regret about that, I feel guilty. But guilt is a particular state of mind when, in a sense, it's maybe a lessening of your self-esteem. My Jewish and Catholic friends both claim that their religions are the champions of guilt. We Jews, we know, we invented guilt, or we Catholics, we invented guilt. Guilt is something where you feel the negative thing that you've created has permeated you, stained you in such a way that there's nothing you can do about it except by relying on an outer agency, God or someone else's forgiveness. And even then, sometimes you still feel guilty. from a Buddhist perspective, that's not constructive at all. What is constructive is a sense of regret. Like, say, for instance, if you and I were eating pizza, and you were talking, I was eating the pizza first, and after some time you noticed I was foaming at the mouth, and you'd eaten a little bit, and I'd eaten much more, and I was obviously poisoned by the pizza. How would you feel about having eaten a little bit of the pizza? Would you feel guilty? Does that make sense? You wouldn't feel guilty about it. You'd feel regret. In fact, you'd seek out some remedy from that poison. Hopefully, you would think of me also. I've eaten much more than you. But you would seek out some remedy. You'd feel regret. You'd think, I shouldn't have eaten that. Now I need to, knowing that this will have some bad effect on me, I'm going to seek out some remedy for this. So that's the first step. A sense of, in this lifetime, I've created a lot of activities that were quite, right off the bat, negative. I stole money from mom's purse, or I broke the windows, or, whatever kind of naughty things you did. And as we've grown up, maybe when we start to recognize karma also, we may begin to recognize that we did things that we didn't know were negative at the time. We went fishing, we killed, we put out poison for the rats and the insects and so forth, just out of self-cherishing thought. So to feel regret about that we've created negative karma, and even to regret actions that we've done in the past that you don't remember doing, but you might think, how can you regret something you don't remember? You could, by understanding that there are effects taking place on us now. Say, for instance, when your things are stolen, you can recognize, I must have stolen in the past. And instead of being upset about your stuff being stolen now, you can purify that negative karma, thinking, I shouldn't have stolen in the past. See, this is what happens. This is a result. This becomes an obstacle to my continued happiness and practice. This becomes an obstacle to my being able to be generous with this material that was stolen. In the future, I want to abstain from stealing. So one of the opponent forces is regret. Second one is making a very firm intention not to do again, like a vow. That can help the continuity of doing the action again in the future. The regret helps especially to purify the force of the negative karma. It's like if we had a bunch of seeds that were very potent to grow some plant, and I put them on a cookie sheet, and I put them in the oven, let's say 350 degrees for a couple of hours, and I took them out and I planted them. Those seeds, and then there was another group of seeds I didn't put in the oven. Which do you think would give the better? Do you think the seeds that I baked would give better plants? Why not? They'd be cooked. They'd be baked. Well, what's another way to say? They would have lost their potency, perhaps. We know that, right? Fire can cause the seeds to lose their, what's another word? Potency or? Vitality. In the same way, regret can act like that fire on the karmic seeds on our mind. Actually, even regretting the virtuous actions we did can cause those virtuous seeds to reduce. You give $5 to the beggar, and then you go into Starbucks and you don't have any money to buy coffee. Why did I give money to that beggar? Whatever virtuous karma you'd created by giving the money to the beggar also has been, the vitality of that karmic seed has been lost. But generally, when we regret the negative things we've done, that in itself starts to cause the karmic efficacy of that seed to reduce. The more and more that you can feel real regret about that, the more you purify. And then to prevent what little remnant of that seed there is to reduplicate, for us to say, to steal again in the future. To make a very firm determination, a vow not to do that in the future. One of the other things you can do to purify negative karma is to create virtuous karma as an antidote to that. Like, say, the visualization of Vajrasattva is one of those things. Imagining white nectar coming down, purifying you. Also, feeling regret at that same time. That kind of virtuous activity. In the future, even some remnant of the karma ripens, it will always be associated with that virtuous activity you did, so something will come and mitigate the action. Maybe you'll be poor as a result of stealing, but because of having created some virtuous karma as an antidote to that stealing, maybe you've given in the past as an antidote to that. When you are poor, maybe someone will come to your aid with, resources and so forth. The fourth opponent force is called the force of reliance. So it means relying on refuge and bodhicitta, which both purify negative karma and create virtuous karma. So here, let's go back. The force of intention or motivation, the force of white seed, creating virtuous karma, the force of repudiation. In one sense, it means repudiating that negative actions that we've done in the past, purifying them through the four opponent forces, but also it means repudiating the negative states of mind that we have that can create negative karma in the future. So working on the antidotes to our attachment, to our pride, to our, our lust, to our anger, and so forth. But particularly from Mahayana point of view, repudiating the self-cherishing thought. Have you heard of the Bodhisattva vows? Maybe some of you have taken Bodhisattva vows. Is there a numeration? Who knows the Bodhisattva vows? Do you know the Bodhisattva vows? We have books. I mean, there's long lists. There are many lists. There are 18 root vows, 42 subsidiary vows, other advices. And we might think, where did those vows, did the Buddha actually set down all of those? Actually, that enumeration in the Tibetan tradition is drawn from 3 sutra sources. When the Buddha said Bodhisattva should act in this way and so forth. But the real essence of all the Bodhisattva vows, the real core essence, is not to have an instant of self-cherishing thought. If you have self-cherishing thought, you've broken the Bodhisattva. We have self-cherishing thought almost continuously. Even when we're meditating on eliminating the self-cherishing thought, we're still permeated by self-cherishing thought. So that's why it said that the Bodhisattva vows, breaking the Bodhisattva vows, is almost like continuous, like rain falling. So to repudiate the self-cherishing thought and to be working on ways of eroding it, even though you can't avoid it completely, to work on ways of avoiding it. Like, say, for instance, when we're in the East, maybe you don't notice it so much here. Sometimes a big boulder will fall on the road from the side of the hill and block the bus route. And for days, nothing can get by until, we know that from India probably. But from the very first instant the crew comes out with the first sledgehammer, crack on that boulder, because it can't be, it's too big to be rolled away by itself, or too dangerous to roll down by itself. From the first time you hit it with a sledgehammer, already you can see the end of that obstacle. The first crack in that, there's some light. The people in the bus can think, okay, I can see this is going to end. In the same way, when you start to work on eradicating the self-cherishing thought, even the first little breakthrough, it's just having a little bit of insight that this might be possible, that's already eradicating, repudiating, even to a minor extent, the self-cherishing thought. This will eventually be able to be done. So the force of repudiation has to do with both purifying negative karma and things that are done in the past, and repudiating the minds that create negative karma. Our delusions, our self-cherishing thought and everything. So white seed repudiation, this is purification and the accumulation of merit and purification. Then fourth one is the force of the five forces, the force of familiarity. Familiarity is kind of the definition of meditation. Meditation means familiarizing ourselves with a wholesome object. Have you heard that before? I mentioned. The more you can concentrate, the faster you can familiarize with that wholesome state. Let's say, if you meditate on love, the more you can concentrate on that without distraction, the more you can leave an imprint and familiarize your mind with that. You could also familiarize just by doing it again and again. But you can leave a firmer, deeper imprint in our mind through formal meditation. So familiarity also means during our lifetime, I'm going to familiarize myself with the Buddhist practices. I'm going to do my, what practices I promised to do. There might be some little meditations that you do every morning or mantras that you've committed to do to familiarize with that. But I'm going to familiarize myself by listening to the teachings again and again. That's the first step. Hearing and reading. When the Dalai Lama signs his name, he doesn't say, I, the Dalai Lama, the highest Lama in Tibet, or something like that. Or Je Tsongkhapa didn't say, Lama Tsongkhapa, the founder of the Gelugpa tradition, didn't say anything like that. What they usually would say, one of the things they do say themselves is, I, Tenzin Gyatso, the Buddhist monk, who has heard who's heard many teachings. Is a very common expression in Buddhism. Heard much. I don't remember the term in Sanskrit, but we say Mangbo Toba. Toba, heard much. Mangtu. It sort of means, even though I don't claim to have any realization, at least I've heard a lot. I can tell you what was said, So hearing, familiarizing yourself with the Dharma, hearing the teachings, thinking about them again and again, contemplating them, weighing them, debating them with your Dharma friends, and then putting them into, familiarizing them through meditation. Single point, taking time sometime, weekend, days, evenings sometime, meditating on the teachings. That means, at our stage now, meditation might seem mainly analytical meditation in a quiet setting, but meditation means once you've got the taste of that, as we'll do in the retreat weekend, holding it single-pointedly, leaving that imprint in our mind. It's called the force of familiarity. So that's what we should be doing in our lifetime, familiarizing ourselves with the Dharma. And then finally, the force of prayer. Fifth force. So there's motivation at the beginning. This is the order I'm putting. Motivation at the beginning, prayer at the end, kind of like dedication. In the middle, white seed, accumulating virtue, repudiation, purifying negative karma, repudiating the negative minds that create more. And the real essence here in the middle, familiarizing, meditating, making some realization. Finally, the force of prayer. The force of prayer is one in which you kind of, in one sense, you dedicate your merits. That can be force of prayer, because dedication is a kind of prayer. May these merits ripen in that way, in this way. But prayer has much wider application too. In future lifetimes, like the prayer of Samantabhadra, in future lifetimes, may I be able to do the actions that I'm incapable of doing now. May I be able to give my life to others selflessly. May I become, even my name, even uttering my name, may it bring benefit to sentient beings. May I become a friend, a doctor, a medicine, food for sentient beings, whatever they need. The great prayers of the Mahayana. So these are called the 5 forces during this lifetime. There's this particular application of these 5 forces at the time of death. When someone is dying, say if one of us, one of our Dharma friends is dying, to remind them at that time, of the force of intention, motivation. May I, in all my future lifetimes, be close to the Dharma. May I never be separated from the Mahayana thoughts and so forth. And the force of white seed, giving away one's possessions at the time of death to accumulate merit, and also as an aid not to be attached to those things close to the time of death. Remember the story I told about the famous novel, the movie that was made of it, All Quiet on the... I always forget. Western. I was going to say Eastern Front. Oh, Western Front. One person is dying. His beautiful army boots are there, and his friend is looking at the boots, looking at the friend who's dying, looking at the boots as though anxious to have those boots. At the time of death, to give away also has that subsidiary benefit to create virtuous karma, the force of white seed, to be able to die without any attachments, without any worries. The force of repudiation, repudiating the self-cherishing thought at the time of death. Recognizing the activities of this lifetime that were meant just for our own benefit as having no lasting value. The force of familiarity, in those final days or hours, familiarizing oneself again and again with renunciation, bodhicitta, wisdom of emptiness, faith in the gurus, and so forth. This is what, in a Buddhist hospice, one would be helping people do, to remember these 5 forces, to activate these 5 forces. And then making prayers at that time. In all my future lifetimes, may I meet the Dharma, may I continue to practice the Bodhisattva path. In Pabonka Rinpoche's text, let me just read a second here. We don't have much time, if any. We talked about these 5 strengths or 5 powers at the time of life. There are 5 strengths that we should practice throughout our life, these 5 that we talked about. There's another set of 5 strengths that we should practice when we're about to die. These are referred to as the transference practice of the mind training tradition. In the Lama Chopa, when it talks about at the time of death, either doing the forceful poa or the transference of mind training. The instruction on transference that is taught in mind training tradition doesn't include exclamations like hik and pei. Those are syllables that you say when you're doing the forceful transference of consciousness. And yet this practice is more profound than all the other teachings on transference. The terms that are used to describe this instruction are the same as the ones that were just mentioned. The strength of intention or motivation. We should resolve not to give up enlightenment mind, bodhicitta, either at the moment of our death or while we are in the intermediate state. The strength of the white seed. The strength of the white seed is to give away to a superior field all of our material possessions, especially those things that we have strong attachment for. There's a long explanation if you get a chance to read. The strength of repudiation at the time of death is to make strong acts of confession for our past misdeeds and resolve not to do them again. If you are a tantric practitioner, you should restore your bodhisattva and tantric vows. So that's why oftentimes when the lamas pass away or dharma practitioners pass away, I remember when Lama Yeshe was passing away, he again and again did Vajrayogini, other self-initiations at that time, so you could die with pure vows. The strength of prayer. In this instance, the strength of prayer does not mean we should pray for such aims as being reborn in the pure Buddha realm. Rather, it means that we should pray that the suffering, bad deeds, and mental obscurations of all sentient beings ripen upon us and we should pray to be successful in generating bodhicitta. The prayer of familiarity. The strength of repeated practice means to prepare ourselves to be able to pass away while meditating on enlightenment, on bodhicitta. This is accomplished by meditating regularly and continuously during this life, and especially at that time of death. So, this is another aspect. If we were, in our own practice, understanding the importance of the 9-round meditation, the experiential meditation on the dissolution of the elements that we'll do again next weekend in more detail, also to be able to help yourself and others at the time of death, to be familiar with these 5 forces, to be practicing them now, this lifetime, and then you'll know what to do at the time of death. What do I do? Do I recite someone's dying. Let's recite the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Okay, now I think that was the first book that I think I ever encountered about Tibetan Buddhism many, many years ago. It was translated by Evans Wentz. I think it was a British scholar who'd studied with a Nyingma Lama. Tibetan Book of the Dead is actually called the Bardo Todal. It actually means liberation through hearing in the Bardo state. And although it may be beneficial for someone who is adept, who has received that initiation, who's practiced that this lifetime, to remind them at the time of death what to practice in the Bardo, what's more effective, the Lamas say, are these 5 forces at the time of death. To remind someone, to die with a faithful mind, to die with calm mind, accumulating virtuous karma with prayers for the future, repudiating the negative karma, negative minds, and so forth. This is much more beneficial. So we'll talk more about that next Saturday. Just to remind you, this Wednesday, there'll be a lecture. I'll give a talk on emptiness, if you have a chance to come. This elusive subject of emptiness. Let's just finally dedicate the energy that we've created this morning. Relax your body and mind. See if you can reduplicate that clear light experience. Just look at the nature of your mind from within. Let go of all the thoughts, distractions. Bring that down to your heart chakra. I think this morning I've created some virtuous karma that will definitely have results within cyclic existence. May these, make a very strong intention, may these not ripen simply in some temporary pleasure that's here and gone, not bringing any meaningful result. But in whatever way it ripens, may it become the cause of my continued Dharma practice. As a result of this karma, may I quickly develop renunciation, bodhicitta, and insight into emptiness. May, as a result of this karma, I develop all of the subsidiary meditations necessary to achieve those greater realizations. The value of this human rebirth, may I realize as a result of this karma, and the meditations on death and impermanence. Due to these merits, my realizations, may I quickly achieve enlightenment from which I can effortlessly and spontaneously benefit all sentient beings perfectly. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So I hope to see some of you next Saturday. If not, we'll